The second blessing of Amidah is called Gevurot, God's power. And even though we often think about it as Mechayeh Hametim, resurrecting the dead, it's important to remember that God's power is the overall theme. So that line about resurrecting the dead comes in the next few words, Mechayeh Metim Berachamim Rabim, and also in the Chatima, Baruch Ata Mechayeh Hametim. And it could be understood as about physical resurrection of the dead, and has been in some points in Jewish history. You can understand it as being a reference to an afterlife, which has also been the case in other parts of Jewish history. But if you look carefully at the words, you can also understand it metaphorically speaking, because what does it say? Mechalkel chayim bechesed, God sustains all life. Somech noflim, God upholds the fallen. Verofech cholim, God heals the sick. Umatir asurim, God releases the bound or the imprisoned. Umekayem emunato lishnei afar, God keeps faith with those who sleep in the dust, which could be those who are dead or those who are poor and sleeping outdoors. So if the idea of resurrection of the dead bothers you because it doesn't seem logical, don't let that get in the way of this blessing for you. I also want to draw your attention to this is where we say Mashiv HaRuach Morid HaGashem in the winter. God makes the wind blow and the rain fall. We say that from Shmini Atzeret through Pesach in the fall and winter, which is when it rains in Israel, and Israel desperately needs that rain to sustain agriculture year-round. So God's power is also about the power to give life and the power of all the cycles of nature. In Israel, then, between Pesach and Sukkot, in the summer and spring, they say Morid Hatal, who brings down the dew. And that's not common here in the U.S. There's two things, actually. First, it never rains in Israel in the summer, so it seems sacrilegious to ask for rain when you know it's not going to happen. And dew is really important to the agriculture of Israel. It's increasingly something that people are starting to say here in the U.S. and something I like to include because it reminds us of our connection to Israel and how powerful that land is in our people's memory and our people's present. One last thing about resurrecting the dead. My classmate, Rabbi Getzel Davis, likes to explain this as being about compost or about the cycle of nutrients in life. So everything that dies goes back into the soil, and those nutrients then become food for new things to grow. And so you can also think about it that way as being part of a circle of life and death and nature.